It is Tuesday, April 16th, 2019, and we have several items of business this evening. We are going to have a special called session followed by our normally scheduled agenda-setting meeting, followed by an executive session. So I'm going to ask the clerk to call roll.
Davenport.
Present.
Parker.
Here.
Link.
Here.
Wright.
Present.
Denson.
Here.
Neesmith.
Present.
Edwards. Harrod.
Present.
Thornton.
Present.
Hamby.
All right. So we have a single item of business. It is listed under old business on the special called session agenda. I'm going to ask if any member of the public who's with us tonight who would like to speak, come up onto the podium. You have 3 minutes to speak. Just provide your name and address. When you have 30 seconds remaining, the light in front of you will turn yellow, and then when your time is up, the light will turn red. So any takers? Just on the special called session, so it's just our defined contribution plan, citizen support group. In just a couple minutes, yep.
Making sure he right.
All right, hearing no citizen input on this item, I do believe we have a commission-defined option that was brought forward on the Tuesday, first Tuesday of this month. And so we're now going to take up that item. Commissioner Denson, do you want to follow up? Commissioner Davenport?
Yes, it's just, I would like to thank Bill Behrman and Commissioner Denson for helping me revise this draft. And its purpose is just to provide transparency to the public and get more individuals involved with their retirement plan. And it mirrors the defined pension plan. Simple as that.
Any other commissioner input on this item?
Looks good to me.
All right, I would entertain a motion.
I motion that we approve.
I'll second.
And that we would approve the commission-defined option, correct?
That we, motion that we approve the commission-defined option.
I second.
All right. Ordinance?
I can't remember if we read it the first time or not, so I'd like to read it.
Absolutely.
An ordinance to amend the Code of Athens-Clarke County, Georgia with respect to defined contribution plans and for other purposes.
All right, thank you, Bill. All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. I would now entertain a motion to enter into executive session upon completion of our agenda setting. All right, we've got a motion from Commissioner Neesmith, a second from Commissioner Hare to enter into executive session following the agenda setting meeting. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? All right, we are now going to move on to our agenda setting session. Citizen input works similarly. We'll have 3 opportunities for citizen input, first on the consent agenda, then on old and new business, and then separately on each of our planning and zoning items. And so now I'll call for citizen input on the consent agenda items, which are items number 1 through 3. 1 through 3.
Sorry, I'm too busy bouncing. Sorry about that.
All right, seeing no citizen input on items number 1 through 3, I'll ask, would any commissioner like to remove an item from the consent agenda? Would any commissioner like to remove an item from the consent agenda this evening? All right, Mayor Pro Tem, we did well.
Yeah.
All right, we are now going to move on to citizen input on old and new business, which are items number 4 through 9. Items number 4 through 9, again, 3 minutes at the podium if you'd like to speak on items 4 through 9. Just provide your name and address, and then you have your 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Johanna Gardner. I live at 972 Waddell Street. And I'm speaking up about the WestBroad pedestrian safety proposal. I'd like to say that I am very grateful that money has been set aside for our neighborhood to be safer to walk in, but I'm very concerned about the proposal to put in sidewalks, particularly on one section like the Waddell Street section, for a couple of reasons. One, it's a not very highly trafficked area for pedestrians because the hill is so steep, and also it's going to take out a lot of people's front lawns. Those lots are very small. It would take out my front lawn if we put in a sidewalk there. And I think there are better ways to have a safe walking area, such as streetlights. We don't have a lot of streetlights in our neighborhood. 4-way stops to slow down traffic, maybe some speed bumps I know that people have talked about having one-way streets, and I just feel like maybe there should be more neighborhood input before this decision is made.
Thanks, Ms. Gardner.
Sorry, I'm a little nervous.
All right. Other citizen input on items number 4 through 9 on old and new business.
How you doing? My name is Sean Westling, and I also reside at 972 Waddell Street. I'm discussing the same. I think it's number 6. It's a projected number 13 project, and it's about once again the sidewalk enhancement on Waddell Street. And I too there was a meeting I think at the Hills Chapel Church, which I somehow didn't get notification for, and apparently I heard there were something like 245 residents who were invited, but only about 42 showed up. And I feel that they talked about many aspects of safety in the community and concerns, and a lot of them were about sidewalks, about lighting, about maybe slowing traffic down. And this proposition came out of that. Now, this proposition is not new. It's been proposed, I think, like 3 or 4 years ago, along with about 4 or 5 other propositions. There was a sidewalk proposition that was approved and construction happened, and I really enjoyed it and liked it. It's on Hills Chapel and on West Hancock down to Baxter Street. And I thought that the reason for with this proposition was what those construction projects were supposed to fulfill the safe paths to school. So I was a little perplexed when I heard this was back on the agenda. I know that there's been funds been allocated, and I get the impression that this is a olive branch for the neighborhood to show that there's improvements being made. And I think that I'm not opposed to sidewalks, but once again, our front yard would be acquired, and we would lose a lot of our part of our vegetable garden and a 20-year-old hedge. But that being said, I feel like there are other possible proposals that were put forth in the last few years that somehow, I guess, have not been remembered. One would possibly be making some of the streets one way and utilizing the other lane, so you wouldn't have to spend any money on any residence land, or there's also significant grade changes. So there's a lot of excavation. It's very costly, and I think that was one of the reasons why this proposition failed last time. In the old proposition, there was ADA concerns because it is such a steep hill. And so I guess I have raised some concerns, and was hoping that this could possibly further be discussed and have other possible better solutions that could utilize the funds that can make our neighborhood safer with better lighting and slowing down traffic that doesn't involve my neighbors losing their portions of their yards and us as well losing portion of our yards. And I don't know, I know you're voting tonight for this proposal, and I was hoping that maybe something could be done to look at that aspect of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Westling. Just to note that this is just our first conversation, so we'll take no final action tonight.
Okay, I thought, okay, great.
Yeah. Any other citizen input on items number 4 through 9 this evening? All right, seeing none, we're going to come behind the rail for a commissioner conversation about old and new business, and we'll begin with item number 4, which is the FY17 Sidewalk Gap Program. So anyone like to kick off conversation here? Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, I knew that this was separated from the Baxter Street and Southview Drive, and I just want some clarification that those two are still moving forward. They were supposed to start this month, and so this one will trail it. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I understand that staff has been working with the property owner for these properties, and they've come to kind of a compromise to handle this project. The mayor mailed me some details about it. I just want to make sure that they're incorporated into the final agenda item for a vote. I haven't compared what you mailed me yet to this. Did that make it into this, or is?
No, that was prior to the construction of this agenda, or my
Okay.
visit and email was actually subsequent to the construction of this agenda item.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to note that I guess I'll be coming up with a commission-defined option to assure that that agreement makes it into the final item. It involves specifics about the walls and the driveway aprons and the plantings and a fence that has to be removed and replaced.
Well, once we have an agreement with the property owner, this agenda item will just get pulled off the agenda with the mayor's permission.
Okay.
Because there won't be a need for it.
Okay, that's good.
And if we had a mayor and commission approved list of improvements and we had to do something midstream that the property owner wanted to do, while we're constructing it, we'd have to come back. We'd have to stop. So I think we would just have an agreement with the property owner. They're good. We'll pull the agenda item and move forward.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other comment on item number 4? All right, moving on to item,
To consent then, or
Yeah, I mean,
could that go to
let's leave it
consent, or-
on discussion just in case
yeah, we
things go
we
wrong.
don't have a final agreement, but
Yeah.
kind of pending that, it would just come off, as Manager Williams mentioned. Item number 5 is just the next phase of our proposed roadway abandonment at 169, or excuse me, at Overlook Drive for 169 feet of abandonment. Any input on this item?
I think we should
Yeah.
move this to consent.
Yeah,
Move it to consent.
Yeah, we did that. All right, so 5, everybody comfortable with that moving to consent? All right, perfect. Gene, 5 is going to move to consent. Item number 6 is the TSPLOST 2018 project number 13, the WestBroad area improvements. And Commissioner Link, this is in your district, if you'd like to kick off conversation.
yeah, I want to thank the folks who came to speak at the podium, because this, particularly the Waddell sidewalk, the Waddell Deering sidewalk, has been approached before, some 5 years ago, and there was some quite a bit of objection in the neighborhood because those houses sit right up on the curb, and they'd be taking their entire front yards. And it was presented 5 years ago as an alternative was for the Hill Chapel sidewalk to connect H.T. Edwards to at least get onto Waddell Street, so they could avoid that weird dogleg, Deering, zigzag, and sharp hill. But that's still attached to this. And I just really question the course of talking about these very expensive sidewalk projects before we even talk about the dire need for traffic calming in the neighborhood. There's not a lot of traffic in the neighborhood. There's, I walk through that neighborhood quite a bit, and I could walk around for an hour and maybe 2 or 3 cars will pass by. But occasionally you get the yahoos, especially down Waddell Street where you do have the steep hills. And I feel that more than anything, these folks need speed bumps. They need 4-way stop signs. The sidewalk's not going to do anything for bike safety. Bikes are still going to be riding in the roads. It's not going to do anything for the young mother pulling her baby out of the back seat of a car, or the little old lady pulling groceries out of the back of the car. Or the fear that, one of these cars going 40, 50 miles an hour down this really narrow, substandard narrow street could end up in somebody's front living room. And the idea that these sidewalks would have folks walking right outside those living rooms. I just feel like there's a lot more discussion to be had about this, and there are other options to making these streets safe for everybody. Motorists alike, and also making the streets safe enough so kids in these neighborhoods can play in the streets. I live on a street that kids play in, and I feel like there are plenty of streets in this really quiet neighborhood with really narrow streets where the kids should be able to ride their scooters and throw a ball in the street and, just be able to step out of the way when an occasional car comes by going hopefully 20 or 25 miles an hour. But, we have policies in place, neighborhood traffic policies in place that do not allow us to even consider traffic calming in these kind of neighborhoods where you do have such limited traffic flow. So I just feel like we really need to take a whole new approach. And I'm coming at this from an equity standard because the neighborhoods I'm talking about are primarily lower income and African American neighborhoods that have very small lots and have houses right up on the curb. They're either never ever going to get a sidewalk because there's just no room, or they're never ever going to get traffic calming because they don't have the traffic volume. I just really think we need to rethink our policies and take a traffic calming first approach to this neighborhood and our other neighborhoods. East Athens especially, I've done a lot of walking around there and I've noticed the same thing. So if we're going to expand our pedestrian safety network, we need to do it in a means that's not one size fits all. I feel like our standards are for suburban neighborhoods. They're not for these in-town small neighborhoods. So I'll be coming up with a commission-defined option to remove some of these projects, at least remove the the more controversial sidewalk projects, the Waddell project and the Pope project, so we can, and to mandate that we do see a traffic study. We have no statistics, we have no data on this neighborhood. We don't know how many cars are going by and how fast they're going, and we don't know the particular areas that should be targeted. So, you know, you know, we're talking about this $4 million bucket of TSPLOST funds, and we haven't even talked to the folks in the West Hancock neighborhood across the way, and there are constant complaints over there about traffic issues, speeding issues, you know, especially because it is more trafficked. There definitely is a much higher volume through that neighborhood. And they do have decent sidewalks over there on many streets, but I really think we need to be just more nuanced in approaching this. I don't like the idea of this big pile of projects being presented all at once. I'm totally comfortable with that Magnolia Street sidewalk going forward because it's been a long time coming. I'm very comfortable with the roundabout at the WestBroad and Hancock. You know, I know that this is a very early concept, but yeah, that intersection desperately needs attention, and I am a fan of roundabouts, so I would like to see that concept move forward. And there's the concept for the neighborhood path at Magnolia and Magnolia Terrace. I think that's a great idea. I'm comfortable with those moving forward, but those internal neighborhood sidewalks, I'm going to request that we put those on hold and have that traffic study and have a broader and more nuanced conversation with the entire neighborhood.
Commissioner Davenport.
Yes, I would like to echo everything, Commissioner Link, but I'm gonna be quick. I, with a capital H, hate this project. Really do. Traffic calming in the middle of a busy highway when you have two churches. No, you have multiple churches. You have 2 funeral homes, and the people on Plaza, who it's not in my district, have called and said that it's gonna hurt the traffic in their neighborhood when you close it off for this roundabout. The business, the little grocery store at the corner of Minor Street, they don't like the fact that I think there's going to be a little small retaining wall in front of their property. I would like just to put this on hold so we can discuss it further, but I can't support this. And the neighborhoods down, I'm not sure, and let me back up. I like to thank Drew and Georgia GDOT for, you know, their efforts and their hard work. But the people I talked to off of Waddell, Minor, who lives in those neighborhood parishes, they said they didn't attend the Hill Chapel event, and everyone I talked to 100% said they did not like this plan. So I would like to put this on hold for further discussion.
Any other input? Commissioner Thornton.
And I'm also going to suggest putting it on hold, and mainly because I spoke with Mr. Wesley earlier, and I think that he asked a question that I could not answer. I did not know the history of where we are now. It seems like this has been a discussion somewhere past, and he wanted to know who made this recommendation. So I don't know, and I think those are the things that people need to know, who are making these recommendations for people in the community. So I need to do some homework. I need to get back. I need to be able to answer those kind of questions before I make these major decisions. Even though I don't live in that district, I do want to understand what I'm voting on. So does anybody know who made this recommendation?
Manager Williams.
So if you'll remember, those of y'all who are still here, it was a Safe Routes to School program. As a matter of fact, the mayor, I think, was the principal at the time of Classic City High School, and they looked at different routes, this one being one of them. There was some concerns about front yards and retaining walls. The reason why it didn't get done was because we ran out of funding. I mean, we spent almost $750,000 on the sidewalks that are now on the ground. When the WestBroad T-SPLOST proposal was made to the Citizens Committee, I think that sidewalk, since it had been talked about, ultimately, that was presented as a potential project for the T-SPLOST, so the Citizens Advisory Committee heard it at the time. And so that was one of the ideas that was presented to the citizens that were invited, the 42 that came to Hill Chapel Church. And I did not attend that meeting, but my understanding is that the concepts that are being put to you are the ones that were the more favored by the folks in attendance. So it was a carry forward from a project that was started in that neighborhood. It was introduced as a potential idea to the Citizens Advisory Committee, and it was carried forth to the present-day folks that attended that session at the church. So that's, Commissioner Thornton, that's how it kind of came to be in front of you now. But it's simply at a concept level. As y'all know, in project delivery, there's a whole bunch more discussion to be had, so.
Other
And
commissioner?
I'm talking about the sidewalks on Waddell, is that?
Yeah, that's all I'm talking about, sidewalks on Waddell.
Commissioner Neesmith?
Well, as one who comes through the West Hancock intersection with West Broad Street probably twice a day, we all know that intersection is so incredibly dangerous, and we do need to solve that problem. I mean, I see near collisions there 2-3 times a week. If you're familiar with the intersection, it's very hard to judge when you're making a left turn coming off of West Broad onto West Hancock. People can't judge the speed of the vehicles coming down the hill, and it's amazingly dangerous, and we hardly ever get a left arrow either to turn. So I hope we can move forward with at least that part of the project.
Any other commission input? Commissioner Denson?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little, I kind of wish that this was presented as two separate items, because we're kind of going in two different directions. Because I do understand the concerns about the sidewalks, and obviously with public comment stuff, maybe needing to look at that a little bit closer. But to me, that's a very separate project, and separated a bit from the roundabout on Broad. Which I agree with Commissioner Neesmith. I used to live on Endale right there years ago, and that intersection is extremely dangerous. It's also a very complex intersection for us to deal with in general. And I guess I want a little bit of clarification. My understanding is we do this acceptance of this concept. We then have the county, TPW has room to work within this concept to try to refine it a little bit more, right? This is not what we're seeing here. So, because I think Commissioner Davenport definitely brings up, I think, the biggest concern with that part, which is how the plaza is going to be dealt with. But that's something that we can refine, come up with a few more alternatives to look at, right?
That's correct. The way the project delivery process works is this concept's high level, and what you'll be doing is authorizing the advancement of them to go to preliminary plans. And the reason they're grouped together is just to move them forward all at the same time, so to move projects forward. And then we'll come back to you in a work session with preliminary plans. There'll be public input, it's just refining it a little bit more. After that, the next time y'all would touch it would be to award the construction award. So there's two more steps in the process, but as far as design, it's this one and the next one.
Okay, yeah, so I just want to make sure that the public understands that this is going to be, we have some time to get this a little better. But for me, looking at this, I think the thing that makes sense maybe is the voting meeting, we might be dividing the question again. I don't know. But I definitely see these as two separate items, and that should be considered uniquely, yeah.
Commissioner Herrick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just repeat what I said when we looked at this at the work session. I'm a huge fan of roundabouts. They're superior to many other types of intersections, but the placing of those crosswalks really gives me pause for concern. I just think people will be approaching that roundabout far too quickly, even with it being designed in such a way that it's got a kind of not quite a dog leg in there, but a curve. This will have to be designed extremely precisely if we're not going to have people coming down, either belting down Atlanta Highway or coming down that hill from downtown and hitting people in the crosswalk.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, is this the first time we've had one agenda item that had SPLOST 2011 and T-SPLOST in it?
I don't believe so.
Okay, because it seems to me it's going to be two different oversight committees, right? It's SPLOST 2011 for the sidewalk, and then we've got the T-SPLOST, which is a different citizens oversight committee. And I was just wondering, I know that there's one way of it coming in together, but I think we're already processing it separately, and it seems like the oversight of it is also separately just by the funding bucket. So might administratively, we get that divided, so the agenda item is separated by its funding sources so that those oversights are batched better, and then I think that that is going to help us also as we process it.
I guess it's my observation that, at the post-passage phase of a SPLOST, the oversight committee's primary goal is to make sure that the project is in concert with the referendum language, rather than to really advise on the nature of the project, particularly where the bricks and mortar kinds of things will be. That really is a user group function at this stage. I don't know if Manager Williams, if you'd add anything to that.
So I believe this is correct, and I'll confirm, but the issue is that the sidewalks that are being presented here will exhaust the rest of the 2011 funds, so we're going to augment them with TSPLOST funds to finish the project.
Okay,
That's
so
why they're
there's the
kinda coming-
partnership for
That's
that
right.
funding. Okay, that helps me, and I apologize for not having picked that up. I'm sure it's in here because it is lengthy history with these projects because of the 2011, especially Magnolia, and then the augmenting of it. And then I guess I also was involved when the 90-degree turn that's happening at the top of Waddell, right up at H.T. Edwards. I remember when that was picked to not be addressed because of the terrain, a lot of that being the ADA. Is it because we have the alternate route, the new sidewalk closer to the church and on Minor Street that is flat enough for disabilities? Is that why we can now go ahead with a steep sidewalk and it be okay?
I'd have to check into that.
If we could look into that, because that was part of the reasons that the other route was picked. But if now there's an established route that is conducive for, as an alternative to the hill, I'm just wondering why it's coming forward now. I mean, I know why it's coming forward because that path, I take it, and I know that the Clark Central students tend to do Waddell versus the other area. But this is a lot of improvements that we're trying to make, and I want to make sure that they're acceptable.
Commissioner Hamby?
Sure, thank you, Mayor. My question is the augmenting part. We have Magnolia Terrace that's going to be augmented by TSPLOST. Magnolia, is a SPLOST project that was well developed long before WestBroad came about. My concern is if too much money is being augmented from TSPLOST that has a specific purpose for a specific neighborhood area, I just don't want to shortchange this neighborhood. Because it seems like, if Magnolia was on the books before TSPLOST even passed, there was a reason Melissa and I worked on the WestBroad committee and put some money in for TSPLOST to focus on projects that weren't already in the pipeline, and to enhance the neighborhood and to make sure that they get what has been promised to them as well. So I guess my question is, at what point will y'all determine what needs to be augmented?
Well, and ultimately, y'all help to make that decision too, in approval of these concepts. I don't know why I cannot pull up, this is going blank when I get to that.
I didn't see a certain percentage in there.
But what I'll clarify after tonight for all of you is how much each project costs, what money's going into it at this point being suggested.
Commissioner Thornton?
I think the manager answered my question. I guess what I'm trying to figure out, not just learning, this was a project or recommendation some years ago, right? And what pot of money was that?
So about 5 years ago, we drew funds from the 2011 SPLOST package to create that Safe Routes to Schools sidewalk enhancement program that included the WestBroad segment and the Hills Chapel and Minor Street segments. The network that was conceptualized at the time also included Waddell and I think a couple other small connector pieces. And of course, we just didn't have the money for the entire Waddell stretch. So that wasn't included in the engineered plan that came to us and then was voted upon, and then we got a contractor to build.
So now we're looking at TSPLOST money for this to continue whatever was started a long time ago, right?
That's right.
TSPLOST money. And even though there were other recommendations of how TSPLOST could be used on Waddell, those got lost somewhere or changed, or what happened? There were other, there were other recommendations. I'm just trying to figure out why we went to the street concept, the pavement concept.
Sidewalk?
Yeah.
Okay. There were, if I remember, there were several different alignments that were done as part of Waddell. I'm not sure if all three or just one was shown to the citizens at Hills Chapel the other day, but we can find out.
I just, when people raise questions, we need to be able to answer them openly and honestly. If we don't know the answers, we need to put this somewhere until we can get it. And I'm not real comfortable. I just need to hear from you, Commissioner, before I move any further.
Manager Williams, it might be helpful to see the materials that were presented at the Hills Chapel meeting so we can see sort of what that entire buffet of options was that ended up being distilled into the material we saw at the work session.
That would be good for me.
Commissioner Link?
I just want to note that traffic calming and street lights were not presented as options at that meeting. When you look at the feasibility study and you look at some of these past studies that were done with like tremendous neighborhood input, a great deal of effort, the number one concern is the speeding and street lights, the lighting and speeding. That's what folks feel makes them unsafe walking through their neighborhood. The volume is very low. It's just the occasional Yahoo that's going well over what would be a reasonable speed on a narrow neighborhood street like that.
What's a Yahoo?
Yahoo, I don't know.
Don't use that
Whatever you
word.
want it to be, Mike.
I'll just make a couple of notes, kind of having been involved in some of the preliminary conversation, kind of with use of the 2011 funds. I was really interested in the notion that a citizen brought forward about the prospect of a one-way street that could allow the sidewalk really to kind of move into what now is the asphalt area. I thought it was an intriguing concept. And I mean, it sounds like at least to some degree the Waddell component's not ready for prime time. So I'd be interested just in seeing what alternate prospects there were that might include some four-way stops or other elements. I think like Commissioner Herod and others, the roundabout is clearly a safer prospect and has served us well. In other places where that treatment has been implemented. Commissioner Hamby mentioned kind of other funding sources, and I will remind everybody that there's a general sidewalk fund within the TSPLOST package, and so if there's some consideration of wanting to see Magnolia as a continuation of the generic or broad sidewalk package rather than using the WestBroad TSPLOST funds, that's out there.
And I would appreciate that option because I certainly don't think we're going to take some Atlanta Highway corridor money or Prince Avenue corridor money or Atlanta Highway and use it for projects that are already out there. I mean, the purpose of these TSPLOST projects for these corridors was to bring new monies to the table for new projects. So that's the way I saw it, and I don't know about the others, but that's certainly the way I saw it.
And I just offer that, a lot of these end up being like continuation projects. And I think a good example is a greenway. So there were previously approved concepts by the mayor and commission that we weren't going to have enough 2011 money, so TSPLOST was going to come and take over those. You might remember. So with sidewalks, projects like that, it tends to continue from past concepts that were discussed. But we can certainly get you some more detail. I do want to say, as it relates to the four-way stops and those types of traffic management devices, we do follow the MUTCD, so it has to fit that. And then, as Commissioner Link stated, the neighborhood traffic management program does have some parameters that the mayor and commission approved, that we adhere to. And the other thing is that we need to really look closely at the project description for the WestBroad neighborhood, because it was really focused on pedestrian safety. And you might say, well, let's put some speed humps out there. Well, that's to control the traffic indirectly for pedestrian safety, but we just need to make sure that it goes along with the spirit of what they meant to do.
Commissioner Edwards?
Thank you. These project plans are very difficult for me to read. The street names are in a very faint yellow type.
Takes a while.
It would be helpful. Has that been addressed? Sorry.
No.
So,
If you let it load up, it takes a while for it to straighten out.
Blooms. It
It
blooms.
blooms. So you have to
it
wait.
changes
You
from
have to wait
small
for it.
yellow?
It's foggy at first, and then it sharpens up. It takes a while. I don't know if that helps.
It doesn't.
This has been loaded for 15 minutes. It's just very small and yellow. It's hard for me to read. But regardless, when we're looking at the Deering Extension and Waddell Sidewalk, Manager Williams, I'd like your input on why as we take the turn onto Deering Extension where it's about to turn into Waddell, there's a crosswalk and the sidewalk changes to the other side. And then you go down Waddell a block and then there's a crosswalk where the sidewalk changes to the other side. And I'm wondering, why do we have those two crosswalks? Why doesn't the sidewalk just have one continuous run on that one side of the road?
I think my understanding is some of the constraints on either side that they're trying to dodge and having to cross the road. I mean, obviously it would make more sense to have a continuous facility.
Yeah.
But whether it's retaining walls or topography or other issues, I think that's the purpose of crossing the street.
If you could please clarify that for me.
Okay.
Just with some, because if pedestrian safety is the goal, then I would just like to be very certain that those two crosswalks are absolutely necessary. We need to change the side of the street for these sidewalks. And then last, when it comes to this Broad Street traffic circle, Hancock traffic circle, there's some pretty sizable concrete medians that exist around the circle, spokes of the circle, sort of. And in the plan, they just appear like gray concrete. It would be nice if we had some plantings there within those medians, if possible. There's a really large one to the west of the circle heading down Broad Street towards Alps. That's a pretty sizable concrete island there. It'd be nice if we had plantings there instead of just raw concrete. So.
I think Commissioner Hamby is offering to plant that.
No.
Well, I know,
My planning
and
days
you-
are over. But I agree with that if that were to happen that way. But I do share the concern about the plaza and about basically we'd be closing that street off from that standpoint, and then you shift traffic over to other streets to get out. I mean, I just think I would hope they could look for a way. I know this is just a concept, but I hope they could look for a way to work the plaza into the roundabout so that it's a great street, and it's got a lot of history to Athens, I believe, and so I just feel like we need to do what we can to see how to incorporate that into this roundabout.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, I agree. I know it's clear that the sidewalk plans that are in here have had much more time and measurement and refining. And then the roundabout is a loose representation of the idea. And so since we're at that stage of input, I would not want us to be closing off any roads. So make sure that there's enough space in the plan so that it's wide enough so that, because I'm concerned about emergency vehicles that would need to come and go from there for neighborhood connectivity. I think insurance rating type thing could be affected. Again, that's not my realm, but those are the kind of questions that come to mind. So I think if we can avoid closing off any streets on such a busy area, that'll make that roundabout have a more welcome revisit. And then on facts and issues number 1, it says project number 13, West Broad area pedestrian improvements. Is that the description that we're needing to match up with? Or is there more? Because I want to make sure street lighting is available as an option for improving pedestrian improvements.
Yeah,
That
tax
would be-
issues number 1 is the correct project description.
Okay, all right. And so in streetscape improvements to improve pedestrian movement, we can all agree that street lights would be that. We can check as you're looking into that.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, traffic management is included in that project description, and I would argue that traffic calming is traffic management. Four-way stops are traffic management, speed bumps are traffic management. I'm also curious I'd like to see a better breakdown of the funding. The Waddell sidewalk, I'd like to see the cost of the sidewalk going up the hill towards H.T. Edwards and the cost of the sidewalk going up the hill towards Clark Central, to break those two off. Because from what I understand, the Deering and Waddell was kind of thrown out in favor of the Hills Chapel and Minor route to get to Waddell and then on to Clark Central.
Mr. Denson?
Just building on what Commissioner Herod brought up with, the first time I looked at this also, my biggest concern was the crosswalks that being there, and trying to imagine how that was going to work. And I understand we're going to put in kind of severe curves to make cars slow down so that they're at a speed where people can cross there. My concern is, and this is from just seeing it on a weekly basis, I drive through the traffic circle on Whitehead and Tallahassee multiple times a day, and I would say at least once a month, if not more than that, you can see the car marks where somebody has not realized there's a traffic circle there and has kind of used it as a monster truck ramp right into the middle of it. I don't know how many times I've seen the sign that's there just knocked down. I'm sure staff is very familiar with this because we have to keep putting it in. So my concern there is then, thankfully, I don't believe anybody's been hit there, and with that, we don't really have pedestrians crossing onto in that direction because there's no medians. But my concern is then that these pedestrians might be unprotected while waiting, say, in the median here, and we're directing the traffic to turn towards where they would be standing, say if they're waiting to cross again. And my concern is that they would be already going at a speed too fast to be able to slow down, making a danger to the people standing in these meetings or waiting to cross in the crosswalk. So we might need to, I wonder if it's been looked at to have some kind of protective wall there where people are entering in so that they are protected by oncoming traffic that might not be prepared or familiar with a traffic circle being there and that need to slow down. So,
I think Commissioner Herod just bought a truck, by the way.
Big old one with big wheels.
They call him Yahoo.
Clearly, this is not going on consent, so we're going to move on to item number 7. Item number 7 is expansion of our assigned vehicle program for Athens-Clarke County Police Department officers. This is one of a couple of things that in the last series of months, as we've examined the FY20 budget, I've asked for sort of forward funding for to begin in the current fiscal year. Another example was the contact mechanism for the municipal court, where we were going to provide funding. We are going to provide funding in FY20 for the texting and emailing contact system for municipal court. And this was another one where, kind of upon discussion, I asked Manager Williams if we could peel some money from the current fiscal year budget to begin this program sooner rather than later. This has been long under discussion by the commission, and I think as some folks have said in other meetings, this is one where I think mindset has evolved, kind of understanding that we are a relatively small community and kind of an industry norm in policing is that you do have a take-home car within reasonable confines, and so this expands take-home opportunity to 20 miles outside the county line. Commissioner Neesmith?
I'm among the commissioners who's been collared by police officers about this very subject over the years, talking about how important it is to them and what a morale booster it would be. And they would actually multiply their availability to answer calls, because they can answer calls to and from work because they're in their patrol car. They don't have to come in and get their car and then answer the call. So I think this is a mutually beneficial proposal, and I'm fully supportive.
Commissioner Harrod?
Thank you. I support it as well, but I have two questions. The first question says in the budget information, expenses, annual expenses, $17,500, but later down in the document, it says $67,676, and I'm trying to figure out why the difference.
This just gets us through the end of this year, and it's more, if you divide that 67 by 12 months, then it's like 11 or 12,000.
Okay.
But I just put a little extra in there. We won't, if we don't spend it, it doesn't leave contingency.
Okay. All right.
Make sure that we're right.
So then the second question, I know that you're talking here about, I guess, two concentric circles, 20 driving miles from the county's boundaries, and that covers 85% of officers with callback responsibilities and 80% of general other sworn officers. And if you go to 35 miles, it includes all of the currently sworn callback officers and 96% of the other officers. And you're recommending going to 20 miles. I would like to know how much would it cost just to simply cover everybody?
Okay. And in my understanding too, and if, sorry, I'm having issues here. Pull it up. My understanding that the 35 miles for the critical incident responders covered 100%, and the general sworn was 80% at 20 miles.
That's right. That's what it says here.
And just trying to be mindful of just, the mileage on the cars. We don't necessarily want to leave everybody out, but honestly, it's just sort of a judgment call.
No, I understand that. I mean, there are all sorts of different considerations to take into account, one of which is budgetary, obviously, but I would just like to know what would it cost to cover everybody?
I believe it's another $20,000, but I'll verify that for you.
A year?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, a year.
Other input on this item?
Consent.
No.
Let's leave it
No, I'd
on.
like to get those budget numbers back.
Discussion kind of for that component that Commissioner Harrod asked for.
Yes.
All right, we are moving on to item number 8. For the art lovers among us, this is the SPLOST 2011 project number 3, the fire station number 2, and the cooperative extension, proposed public art and artists. Commissioner Neesmith.
I sat on the Arts Committee that made the selection last week, and we selected a piece of work. I don't know what else I can say, Blaine. It's bold and beautiful. It'll be a landmark. It's not just a little statue or etchings on windows. And I don't know if I can say where the artist is from or not. How far along are we with the process? Oh, I'll just say it. It's a local artist. So it's got a lot of good things going for it. I don't know who it is, but I know it's a local artist.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I'm glad to know that the artists selected for these projects are local, and the other one has local ties. I believe he's a graduate of UGA, so that's good. And I also want to say I cannot wait to see the chicken. That might get me driving all the way out to that new cooperative extension center just to hang out with that chicken.
Just want to remind you, you can take the bus out there, Commissioner Link.
I will.
Mr. Mayor, let me just interject. It's not just, it's actually an interactive.
I know.
So
With the
children are
windmill
gonna
and
love it. Yeah.
stars and, yeah.
We'll have our own big chicken here in Athens-Clarke County, friends.
Chicken. Oh, and the egg, actually.
Any other input on this item? All right, we're going to move on to number 9, which is review of the board's authorities and commissions handbook. I believe Commissioner Herod, this came through government operations. Would you like to provide an overview of this?
It did, we had extensive discussion about it, and I encourage everybody to read the handbook and vote accordingly. So basically, being a little bit less flippant, this came to us last year, and the idea was to provide some better insight into what the various boards, authorities, and commissions do, both for people who apply to be on them, but also for just generally members of the public. So we've kind of batted it around on a few meetings, and as I say, I think it's a good document. No document's perfect, but I think this is a pretty good one. One issue that we didn't actually have some discussion in our committee meeting, but it came up afterwards, was, and I don't know whether we need to include this in the bylaws of the mayor and commission, Mr. Attorney, or whether it's just sufficient to put it in the document here, but we had some discussion about not having people serve on more than one board or authority or commission at the same time, and if we need to make an amendment to the rules of the mayor and commission, I would like for us to do that at the next voting meeting. If it's simply sufficient to have it in this document, I believe, Justin, there's a sentence in here was added, is that correct?
Yes, sir. I was find it.
Okay. But other than that, I think it's good to go.
Commissioner Neesmith.
Does this document address attendance by the citizen and provide for removal?
It does.
Okay.
But it does not, I think the initial version had an actual number, whereas this just says, a
You're
substantial
subject.
amount of them. So there's some judgment call there as well.
Commissioner Denson.
Yeah, and the reason we got rid of the number and kind of went to a judgment call is that some of these BACs meet once or twice a year, while some of them meet monthly, and it's difficult to get a number that fits for all of those. But I agree with Commissioner Herod that I think this is really good, and I would like to see, as we've been talking about, there being some problems with us being able to meet quorum with some of these BACs, and maybe some of the people who are applying for these things not completely understanding the responsibilities involved. I wonder if somehow we could plug this into the application process before the interview, but after the applicant has had it, that this would be sent to somebody, so everybody who we are interviewing hopefully has read through this, and we can hold them to that at the interview and expect that they have, so they have a better understanding of what they're getting into.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps we could have a follow-up that updates the application process, the paper, the application. I think we had one recently that was printed out, and I mean, and add that to it, saying on the website you can follow the handbook. We would expect you to review this before the interview. Maybe we could send that back to committee or whatever would be the proper addition. I mean, we can move this forward as is, but I think that maybe the next follow-up would be the application.
I think we could probably administratively handle that. I don't know, Manager Williams, what your thoughts are.
Sure. And I was just thinking, I haven't spoken to the public information officer yet, but we could also do a companion video where folks, kind of hit the high points of what it means to serve and what your role is and what the expectations are. And then we could follow on with some more specifics.
Yeah.
Because it might be, I think it's a great manual too. It's a lot to read, if you're just kind of sticking your toe in the water. So maybe we can have some gradations of detail get in there.
It's good.
Would folks like to move this to consent?
Please.
Well, I got two small things. One, I would like to know about whether we restricting people to only serving on one board, authority, or commission at the same time. Does that require a change in the rules of the commission?
I think there are two ways to do it to make it enforceable, and one would be the rules of the commission, but that would just, that's rules, or you could adopt an ordinance. The rules would probably handle that.
Okay.
If you'd like me to bring that forward and put it in the agenda package.
I would, assuming the rest of the committee's okay with that, the GOC.
I didn't hear the question. What were you asking?
Can we remove Commissioner Hamby from office? It was, if we wanted to limit so that nobody could serve on more than one board, authority, or commission at one time, how would we do that? And then Commissioner Edwards notes that the ADDA, the page says that regular meetings are the second Tuesday of each month, but I understand that's changed.
It has.
It has changed.
So that's second Thursday of each month. So if we could change that. But other than that, I'm happy for it to go on consent.
But maybe we'll just leave it on discussion to ensure that we've got those elements covered.
Okay.
And then if we need to move to consent, it's easily done. All right, we are going to move on to planning and zoning items. So I'm going to shift from this seat, and the screen is going to come down, and Planning Director Griffin is going to come up.
Might be home by 8 today.
Just to remind everybody that we've got a relatively new process. We are now taking citizen input of 3 minutes at agenda-setting meetings on each planning and zoning item, following the presentation from each item by Planning Director Griffin. So I'm going to ask him to kick off the first item.
All right, we have two amendments for you this evening. The first is a request for a plan development at 413 Millard Avenue, 347 Sunset Drive, and a portion of 350 Hawthorne. The request is to change a small piece from traditional neighborhood and Main Street business to an overall traditional neighborhood. The small piece is the Main Street business component. And then also to rezone from an RS8 single-family designation and a portion commercial general to an RS5 plan development, the purpose being the development of a cottage court community. Went over a little bit of this. 2 parcels, about an acre in total. Proposals for 7 single-family lots with homes on them. There are architectural standards in place. 2 homes in front of the street, 5 in the rear with common green space, and all parking is through one shared driveway with shared parking to the rear. There are open spaces at the center. There is a common space building of about 650 square feet, and then some covered parking. And the units are all a mix of 2 and 3 bedroom units, minimum 1,100 square feet. Several waivers with this type of a cottage court development. It just really does not fit our ordinance in terms of the standards. So the waivers you see in many cases are just design modifications, lot size, lot widths, frontage requirements. There are some tree canopy requirements in terms of conserve that they're unable to meet with this type of a development in the density, and then some setbacks as well. And this is all covered in detail in your staff report. Again, a few more waivers. And then you see here the subject property outlined in red. Currently 2 single-family houses on 2 parcels, and then a small piece of commercial general. And I think you'll see that this is future development. The kind of the mauve color Main Street business designation is the piece that is driving the need to modify future development classification. And then you see the zoning change from RS8 and CG to an RS5 plan development. Current existing conditions of the property. And then the proposed cottage court community with the, and this would, with it being a PD, this, if approved, is a binding plan, binding footprints on the units. You know, all of what you see here would be required to be built if approved. And then some elevations of the unit types, and these do correlate with the footprints that you see on the ground, and then across the top, just some conceptual pictures. These are some photographs from other cottage communities that are out there that are of the same design standard in terms of the majority of these units face a common green space and a common outdoor kind of gathering area. Planning Commission recommendation here is to approve the future land use change as well as the zoning map amendment. 3 conditions, some additional tree plantings where critical root zones will not be compromised. We feel like there's a really good possibility over time with this development that the trees that are being shown as retained, but they're unable to meet conserved status based on the development proximity to their root zone. We may begin to lose some of those, so we're looking for some additional tree plantings to go ahead and plan for that. Full extent of the driveway should be a minimum of 16 feet. This comes out of our fire marshal review of the project. And then just to make sure it is clear that the architectural elevations that were included as part of this report are considered binding and would be adhered to. And that completes the Planning Commission recommendation to you is approval with a 7-to-1 vote.
All right. Now's the time when we'll take citizen input on item number 10. And again, you have 3 minutes. Please provide your name and address.
Thank you, Mayor Gertz and Commissioners. My name is Bob Smith, Smith Planning Group, 1022 12 Oaks Place in Watkinsville. I'm here tonight representing the Tingle family. We began the design process of this development about a year ago. And during the course of the design, I must say that I've enjoyed engaging with the Normaltown community. The community involvement and input has made this project better, particularly in light of laying the framework for future pedestrian connectivity. This rezone petition is for a cottage court, or for what some know as a pocket neighborhood. By their very nature, cottage courts have a modest increase in density. But the primary reason this PD is necessary is because our development code really doesn't like cottage courts with homes on fee simple lots, as Brad mentioned earlier. This is not intentional, I'm sure. It's just that cottage courts weren't contemplated as a development form, and thus modifying the regulations such as lot size and frontage requirements, parking requirements, and setback standards require us to seek waivers from the development code, and thus the reason for the planned development. Obviously, cottage courts aren't for everywhere. They must respond to the character and fabric of their surroundings. We've done that here. We may not have pleased everyone, but we've certainly made every attempt to address any concerns brought to our attention. By and large, the Normaltown community has embraced the project, not just because it's cute, because you have to admit it's cute, but because it's a way to provide a bit more density, prevent gentrification, and provide a more diverse housing opportunity within the Normaltown neighborhood. We're accepting of all the conditions recommended by the Planning Commission, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Right down, I think it's technically on Link's side.
It's on my side. Yeah, it's
We share
right
that.
next
All
to
right,
this.
if you want to flip a coin,
Commissioner
Link.
I'll
District
start.
3, you start.
Yeah, I mean, I love this project. I'm a huge fan of cottage courts. I was really happy to see the Dublin Street one get approved a couple months ago. I really feel like this is a direction we need to go in this community to encourage some more modest and affordable housing in our highly desirable neighborhoods without impacting those neighborhoods drastically. And there's been multiple meetings with the neighborhood, lots of positive feedback from the community. There's nothing to not like about this project. And, this is a neighborhood I lived in Normaltown, just right around the corner on Best Drive for 4 years, back in the 90s, early 2000s. The neighborhood's changing drastically. These modest post-war homes are being torn down and added onto, and they're selling for upwards of $500,000. Here we're gonna have some very small, well, not necessarily very small. I mean, these are like 1,200 square foot homes, which is about the size of the house I live in Boulevard that was built 105 years ago. So once upon a time, this was an average working class size home. But because they're going to be on these small lots, they're not going to be able to be expanded. They will remain of a certain size and within a certain affordability bracket. And I feel it will bring some stability to the neighborhood and to the housing market in that area. So I'm all for this project, and I want to thank Mr. Tingle and Mr. Smith for all the work they put into it and all the outreach they've done. And I want to note that Mr. Tingle lives in the neighborhood just around the corner. So, you know, if the if the neighbors don't like it, he's definitely hearing about it. And there's been a lot of very positive feedback and excitement about this project.
Tim?
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to echo Commissioner Link. I definitely support this project, and especially support how Mr. Tingle and Mr. Smith have made themselves so available to the community with multiple public meetings for people in the community who did have concerns, to be able to have those concerns addressed, and being able to meet with commissioners too to go over some of those things. The biggest concern that I had heard from people in this area was kind of just a fear that this was going to attract more college students living these things. And after my conversations and seeing more information about this myself, and I think people who live in this in Normaltown, I've had those fears quelled and realized that that's not what's actually being done here. What's being done is a new kind of community that embraces more, I think, better relationships and community in general in these neighborhoods. And I do hope that we can possibly move forward and look at our zoning and planning to find a way to encourage more of this kind of stuff being created, because we've talked many times, we want density. I think we do have to be careful in how that density is created, but we need density, and I think this is one of those ways that really gets it done. Plus, bringing up the fact that like having shared parking like this minimizes stormwater runoff, little things like that, and also the future potential we have to connect this for walkability and stuff to Hawthorne through that neighborhood, which would be amazing for me living in this area before. That connection could be great, and hopefully we can make that happen in the future with the other landowners that are kind of in between. And this could be then possibly connected to the Greenway, which is really, really exciting. So I definitely support this and hope that the commission votes in favor.
Other input on this item? All right, we're going to move on to item number 11, request of James C. Warnes for the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta for an amendment to a CNPD. Brad is going to present first.
Thank you. This is for 980 and 994 South Lumpkin. It is a PD amendment. Overall, 3 parcels, about 1.1 acres. Proposed use is a dormitory, including a chapel and commercial space, as well as structured parking. For those of you that were here last year, we saw this initially at that point. This is a proposed amendment based on some changes that they are interested in pursuing once they got into more of the detailed design work. Several waivers, but there were a lot of these waivers that were in place at the initial submittal too. So these are all kind of covered in detail in your report. I won't go through all of them. Some of them increase a little, some of them are reduced a little as part of this new design, but those are all in the staff report. See the property here at the corner of University Court and Lumpkin. Top left is the original. I mean, there's very little change in it. And you can see here from the skin of the building and the overall design, it looks very similar. They flipped the chapel and the retail on the ground floor. They introduced a ground floor on-site resident chaplain type of position that would be there. That's a ground floor residential unit, not typically allowed, so it required a waiver. There are some little nuances like that throughout that were introduced as part of their redesign. And there you see the ground floor modification, really pretty minimal. And then some comparisons here. What this really gets down to in terms of the changes, other than some tweaks here or there, they want to add some more bedrooms and they want to remove some of the parking. The parking was actually discussed at the Planning Commission meeting initially as potentially being a good thing to eliminate some of that structured parking given the location and the nature of the residents that will live here with other parking options. Also reduces traffic in and out off of Lumpkin Street. So there is, I think this may be on the second, a reduction of about 30 parking spaces internally and an increase of some residential units by 15 or 20, bedrooms, not units. That's really the biggest change, but those were changes because they were already dealing with some potential variances that we had to bring back to you, certainly, in expansions. So with all of that, Planning Commission is recommending approval with the 3 conditions. This is the way it came to you. The first 2 conditions have already been addressed in the amended plans that you have. The Commons Lounge is now shown as commercial across the board, which addressed one of our concerns. They are able to meet the 30% max on the compact parking spaces. There was some discussion and concerns at the original review of how the driveway access to Lumpkin Street was going to be handled and how restrictive left turns, if you're northbound on Lumpkin, would be dealt with. All of that is as it was initially. None of that's changed. There are just fewer parking spaces in the deck now than there were before. And they're actually working on the updated application report. We have it in our possession now, and if this is ultimately approved, that will become the new document. But it was easier for the Planning Commission and for you, honestly, at this point, to see what was originally approved with an addendum on top of it and be able to compare. If it is approved, we'll just make it as one again, but that can come prior to permitting. So with that, the Planning Commission recommendation was unanimous to approve the amendment.
All right, it's time for any citizen input on this item.
My name is Jim Warren. My address is 244 East Washington Street, and I represent the Episcopal Church. When the concept of a church-affiliated dormitory in the middle of campus was proposed, one of the defining elements, in fact, number one as far as the church was concerned, was a place in which there'd be student community, a sense of community. As a part of that community was a continuation of the St. Mary's Chapel, which has been an integral part of the University of Georgia for decades. It's an alternative to a large downtown apartment complex. It's located in the middle of campus, and it's all about walkability. This was approved a year ago. There were 2 conditions on that approval. One is that we go with the parking that's in the plan now, and the other is that we have a binding agreement with the University of Georgia regarding access. That binding agreement has been reached, has been executed because it involves access and use of real property. It is recorded in the real property records with the Clerk of Superior Court. After all of that was done, the Episcopal Church engaged a new consultant regarding student trends and demands for college campus housing. They were advised to move away from some of the large commons area that were in the original plan to smaller gathering places and to consider bathroom parity in light of current concerns about gender equity. The redesign is in the interior of the structure to continue the sense of community the church desires to foster. As pointed out, and as you can see there, the exterior is substantially the same as previously. It's the same design, it's the same massing, it's the same exterior finishes. The only difference on the exterior, and you can't see it from this viewpoint, but on the back side of those white buildings are some interior balconies that face the interior of the site. Those have been recessed. There are more beds and less parking. And at first blush, that seems like a contradiction. And that was the first thing that came to my mind when they presented this to me is how can you have more beds and less parking? But again, it's all about walkability. Students who live on campus do not need cars. Students who are the target market for this housing do not have automobiles. Less parking means less traffic, which was a concern both of this group and the University of Georgia. So UGA is happy with the changes. We have worked with campus architect, and Reverend Lowry has met with the higher ups and so on. We have a chaplain who lives on the facility. That's the waiver that Mr. Griffith mentioned. Parents like having a responsible adult on the premises. As he pointed out, we've met the 3 conditions. Actually, I've gotten a report back from staff as to the revised report that we've submitted to them. There's about a half a dozen technical changes that they want made. It's mainly to have consistency between what's in the report and what's shown on the drawings. We'll have that back to them in a day or 2. I want to thank staff because they've been very cooperative. We have worked through a number of issues ever since the very beginning of this to get us where we are today, and we would ask for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public input on this item?
Well, good evening. I am Reverend Lang Lowry of the Episcopal Church, and as you know, you approved this PUD last year, and we can't thank you enough for all your time, as well as staff who has been very cooperative, giving us feedback promptly as when we need it. Also thankful to University of Georgia, who has been very accessible to us and often given us valuable input as well. We're just so very close now to breaking ground. We did hire a consultant who advised us on several things. One is demand has increased within our church for this residence. And also we determined that when it comes to bathroom design, it was just not adequate for the type of diversity of student needs that we'll be seeing going forward. So we needed to make those changes, and that created and begat several other things, including our belief that we could reduce parking, which was a request of planning in both sessions that we've had. We've also been able to get some efficiencies out of this new design and decrease traffic on the site as well. So we're very pleased with those two items. The revised Episcopal House is virtually the same as you have seen, reduced parking and efficiencies. We also went through an assessment internally about, we call it safe church. In layman's terms, it's really setting boundaries between adults and students. And in that assessment, we determined we didn't want to have the chaplain living among students. We wanted them set apart with some security in between. So that was the reason for bringing the chaplain's unit to the street level. We flip-flopped the chapel, frankly, because it gave us more space, and that was an advantage. And another thing has come up in our church that I think is very interesting, and I don't have the stats for here at the University of Georgia, but we are just really moved that 36%, and this was covered in NPR recently, 36% of all students say that they are either at risk and insecure for food or shelter during college. And an astounding 9% of all college students in the United States are living homeless during college. Another term that I've heard used is couch surfing. And so one of the reasons why we're doing this project is we want to provide a 501c3 opportunity to grant students funds to live, where they can get Pell Grants to go to school for tuition. They come up short when it comes to living and food. So this is a very important project to us. We definitely want to reach out to those students and give them help in time of need. Also, those of you who know the Episcopal Church, this is an open community for Episcopalians and non-Episcopalians. So there'll be no decision there as to who we serve. It serves all. One other thing, the chaplain, we also know that depression is rising in universities today. And I think I've heard even in Athens this last year there was a tragedy. We think that a chaplain's needed in times of crisis, just someone to talk to, and so we think the chaplaincy here will be a very important part of this development. But we certainly thank you. We're sad that we have to come in one more time for these requested changes, but we're confident this project can happen with your support, and we appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Reverend Lowry. Any other public input on this item? All right, I believe this is in Commissioner Edwards' district.
This plan appears to be good, and the parking reduction makes sense to me. It's something we've spoken about on the commission, how some of these parking requirements for development sometimes don't correspond with good design. And so I think the waiver here makes sense. This is a central area within campus, and we want to encourage these residents to walk as much as possible. So I'd like to thank all the folks for working hard on this project over the years, and I look forward to seeing it come to fruition.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, this is the third iteration of this project we've seen, and, I liked it from the beginning, but I feel like it's only gotten better and better, and, there's nothing mass-wise on the exterior that's changed about it, but the fact that they're giving up these parking spaces and increasing the density is a good thing. That's good urban design, you know, and they're probably going to save over $1 million in construction costs by giving up those parking spaces and, you know, adding bedrooms and thus be able to lower the rents and make for some more affordable housing for some of these students, because right now that centrally located downtown housing is not affordable for many students. I mean, I think those units are going for $700-900 a bedroom. So yeah, this is a lovely project. It's beautifully designed. You know, all those lovely outdoor spaces, the common area. I like the kind of incremental design of it, where you have kind of, it almost looks like two separate buildings. You know, and the tree buffering, you know, making use of that topography. It's a really, really nice project. I'd like to see more of this kind of stuff.
Any additional input? All right, we have two text amendments. Number 12, Brad, if you could describe that for us.
I will. Number 12 is an amendment to Section 949 of our zoning ordinance, which is the procedures section. This deals with public notices as part of staff conferences for major subdivision review, which comes early at the preliminary plat stage. There is an opportunity within our ordinance for, we hold a meeting, notices are sent out, we post in a paper, and it allows adjacent neighbors to come in and provide comments directly to us. This is a staff-run meeting, and we receive the comments. But there, when this ordinance was drafted, and it has been 20 years ago now, there were some specific requirements that you see in A, B, and C that were put in place that if you wanted to come to the meeting and speak to staff regarding the proposal, you had to file it in writing to us. I mean, there were just a lot of things that if we get to one of these meetings and there are people there that want to speak to us, we're going to let them speak to us. And so it just didn't make a lot of sense to have this in there and have somebody challenge us on that somebody should not have been allowed to speak if they came and followed procedures. So what it boils down to, we're asking for that language to be removed and simply just how we post the notice to be the final language.
Any public input on this item? Commissioner comments? We're going to move on to number 13, another text amendment.
Another amendment also to the procedure section 9.4, this being the 9.412. There's language currently in there that places restrictions on an application's ability to be withdrawn once a legal ad has been posted. That is within zoning procedures, which are the type 1 and type 2 procedures that we deal with, and specifically those that come to you for a final recommendation. That is a requirement, and that's why you have on occasion had to vote to allow a withdrawal if the legal ad has already been run. But the way the current language is, it goes on down through to COA applications, to variance applications, other things that we run legal ads for, but don't fall under the ZPL law necessarily. We just didn't see that there was a need to limit an applicant's ability if they're asking for a variance and they get their report and they see the writing on the wall, the legal ad's been run. I just want to withdraw this and stop it. And we've got a lot better ability today than we did 20 years ago to get push notice back out into the community and let people know in advance so they don't show up for a meeting. There was one other word change. We were listing it as an article, as technically a chapter of the ordinance, so we're making that change too. But it allows a little more flexibility on an application's opportunity to withdraw without a vote. Doesn't change what you all do at all.
Public input on this item? Similar level of interest. Commission thoughts?
Fantastic.
All right, so we're going to adjourn for about 5 minutes for a restroom break and then continue with our executive session.